Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Merrick Lawson stood at the granite kitchen counter, methodically entering numbers into his expense tracking app. The pristine surface reflected the overhead lights, much like his carefully maintained facade reflected what everyone expected to see. Stability, reliability, the human equivalent of a well-oiled machine. $18,000. He stared at the total. 3 months of careful saving, redirected into a 2-week holiday extravaganza for his wife's family. Cabin rentals in MT Hood at premium winter rates. Catering arrangements. Lift tickets for everyone. A private New Year's Eve party at the resort's exclusive lounge. Even airfare for Annie's cousin from Chicago who simply couldn't miss the family tradition. Not once had anyone offered to contribute. From the living room, laughter erupted. Annie's voice rose above the others, that practiced, lilting sound she reserved for her family gatherings. Merrick is just finishing up some boring money stuff, she called out. He'll bring the drinks in a minute. Merrick's jaw tightened briefly before he forced it to relax. He learned early in their 11-year marriage that showing frustration only invited Annie's special brand of concern, the kind that made him feel simultaneously ungrateful and inadequate. He arranged 6 crystal tumblers on a silver tray, pouring 2 fingers of whiskey into each. The Macallan 18, Annie's father's favorite before he passed. Now it was the only acceptable whiskey for family gatherings, regardless of the cost. Coming, he called, his voice measured and steady. Merrick carried the tray through the archway into the living room where Annie's family had settled like territorial cats, each in their preferred spot. His living room. His house. Yet somehow, he always felt like the visitor. Annie reclined on the Italian leather sofa, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders. At 39, she still carried herself with the practiced poise of the former beauty queen she'd been in her youth. She glanced up at him with a quick, dismissive smile before returning her attention to her sister. "Here we are," Merrick said, placing the tray on the coffee table. Carla Brighton, Annie's sister, reached for a glass without looking at him. At 41, she was the louder, more openly entitled version of Annie. Her nails were freshly manicured in a shade of red that matched her lipstick, despite the fact that she complained about being broke just last week when Merrick had covered her car payment. "Again. Thanks, wallet man," Victor said with a smirk, grabbing a tumbler. Carla's husband lounged in Merrick's favorite chair, feet propped on the ottoman. At 44, Victor hadn't held a steady job in 3 years, something he referred to as finding himself whenever anyone had the nerve to ask. Elaine Knox, Annie's mother, sat primly in the wingback chair by the fireplace. At 68, she maintained the cool dignity of someone who believed the world existed specifically to provide for her comfort. Her silk scarf, a gift Merrick had picked out last Christmas, was draped casually around her neck. "Merrick, dear," she said, accepting the drink he handed her. "The ice in this is rather large. Don't you have those smaller cubes? They're so much more elegant." "I'll check the freezer," Merrick replied, his tone pleasant. He'd purchased a special ice maker last month after Elaine's previous comment about the pedestrian ice from their refrigerator door. "Don't bother," Elaine said with a sigh. "This will have to do." Zeke, Annie's 17-year-old son from her first marriage, didn't look up from his phone as Merrick offered him a soda instead of whiskey. The boy had his mother's features, but his biological father's build tall, already broader than Merrick despite his age. He grunted something that might have been thanks, or might have been dismissal. Merrick had been in Zeke's life since he was 6. The boy had never called him dad, but there had been moments, fishing trips, help with school projects, late-night talks about girls when Merrick thought they had connected. Lately, though, Zeke had adopted his grandmother's subtle disdain and his aunt's open entitlement. "So," Merrick said, taking the remaining seat at the edge of the room, "is everyone excited about the MT Hood trip? I finalized all the arrangements today." "It's about time," Carla said, swirling her whiskey. "I've already told everyone at yoga that we're staying at the premium cabins." Jessica Thompson was green with envy. "The premium cabins were booked," Merrick corrected gently. "But I managed to get us the hillside chalets instead." They're actually more private and have better views. 5 pairs of eyes turned to him with variations of the same expression, disappointment. The premium cabins have hot tubs on the deck, Annie said, her voice carrying the edge that always preceded an argument. And the chef's service, added Elaine. You did secure the chef's service, didn't you? I specifically mentioned that to Annie to tell you. Merrick took a careful sip of his whiskey. The chef service was booked too, but I arranged for catering delivery each evening, and the chalets have full kitchens with. Kitchens? Victor interrupted with a laugh. Who wants to cook on vacation? That's like getting a Ferrari and asking for a bicycle pump. Merrick absorbed the criticism silently. He'd spent 3 days working his connections to secure those chalets after discovering the premium cabins had been booked 6 months in advance. He'd paid a lot extra for the privilege. I'm sure it'll be fine, Annie said with a tight smile that communicated the opposite. Merrick does his best, even if it's not always what we ask for. The conversation moved on as Annie described the new ski outfit she'd purchased for the trip on Merrick's credit card, though this detail went unmentioned. Zeke asked about bringing a friend, and before Merrick could address the additional cost, Annie had already agreed. Of course you can bring Jordan, she said. Merrick will adjust the reservations. Right, honey? Merrick nodded. Another person, another lift ticket, another set of meals. He mentally recalculated the budget he'd already stretched to its limit as the evening wore on. Merrick excused himself to refill drinks and check on the catered dinner he'd ordered. In the kitchen, he methodically unpacked the gourmet meals, transferring them to serving dishes as specified in Annie's texted instructions that morning. Through the door, he could hear the conversation continue without him. I don't know why Merrick insists on these family dinners when he spends half the time hiding in the kitchen. Carla's voice carried easily. He likes to feel useful, Annie replied. It's easier to let him fuss than listen to him try to talk business with Victor again. Victor's laugh was sharp. Last time he tried explaining logistics to me, I nearly died of boredom. As if moving boxes from point A to point B is something to be proud of. He means well. Elaine's voice held the practiced charity of someone bestowing a great kindness. Though I do wish Annie had held out for someone with more presence. Like your father had. He's just a walking wallet with a beard, Carla said, and the room erupted in laughter. Merrick's hands stilled on the serving dish he was preparing. The words shouldn't have surprised him. He'd heard variations of the same sentiment over the years, disguised as jokes or backhanded compliments. But something about the naked truth of it and the easy laughter that followed cut through his practiced indifference. He glanced at his reflection in the darkened window above the sink. 42 years old, trim but not athletic, beard neatly maintained, eyes that had once held ambition now simply watched the world with careful assessment. When had he become this man? This accessory to someone else's life? His father's face suddenly superimposed over his reflection the same tired eyes, the same resigned set of the mouth. Donovan Lawson had died of a heart attack at 50, working 2 jobs to support a family that had taken his sacrifices as their due. His mother, in her grief, had warned Merrick on her deathbed, "Don't die for people who don't love you." Yet here he was, following the same path. Merrick loaded the serving dishes onto a tray, his movements mechanical. He carried dinner into the dining room, where the family had already gathered, talking over each other about the latest neighborhood gossip. And no one noticed when he set down the food. No one commented on the careful presentation or thanked him for the arrangement. They simply began serving themselves as if the meal had materialized on its own. Merrick took his seat at the head of the table, a position that should have denoted respect, but instead felt like a convenience for everyone to reach him with their requests. Merrick, the salt. Merrick, did you get the sparkling water or just flat? Merrick, Zeke needs you to transfer money for that school thing. He passed items, answered questions, and made mental notes for payments, while something inside him shifted, like tectonic plates rearranging silently beneath the Earth's surface. The change was imperceptible to anyone watching, but Merrick felt the tremor of it in his core. That night, after everyone had left and Annie had gone to bed without discussing the dinner or their guests, Merrick sat alone in his home office. The glow of his computer screen illuminated his face as he stared at their financial accounts. Joint checking, joint savings, investment portfolio, retirement accounts. 11 years of carefully building security, not just for himself, but for Annie and Zeke. He opened a new browser window and began to search. How to protect assets before divorce. The trailer park outside Coos Bay hadn't changed much in 30 years. The sign still hung crooked. The gravel road still kicked up dust that coated everything in a fine, gritty layer. The trailers themselves might have been different models, but they wore the same resigned look of people making do with what they had. Merrick drove his Audi slowly through the familiar streets, feeling the discordant sensation of being both an outsider and a native son. Children playing in yards stopped to stare at the luxury car passing through their territory. A man fixing a motorcycle looked up with suspicious eyes before returning to his work. He parked outside Lot 17, his childhood home. A different trailer occupied the space, now newer, but already showing signs of hard living. A plastic tricycle lay on its side in the small yard. Faded curtains hung in the windows. Merrick didn't get out of the car. He simply sat, remembering. His father walking home from the bus stop after working a double shift, shoulders stooped with exhaustion but still summoning a smile when young Merrick ran to greet him. His mother stretching ground beef with breadcrumbs to make the groceries last until payday, pretending it was a special recipe rather than a necessity. The constant quiet arguments about money that they thought he couldn't hear through the thin walls. His father's funeral when Merrick was 20A. Sparse gathering, a cheap casket, his mother's hollow eyes as she accepted condolences from people who had done nothing to ease Donovan Lawson's burdens in life. You're too good for them. His mother had told him on her own deathbed 7 years later, cancer having eaten away at her spite but not her clarity. Don't die for people who don't love you. Your father never knew when to stop giving. Don't make his mistake. Merrick had nodded, holding her thin hand, making promises he thought he would keep. Then he met Annie at a friend's wedding. Beautiful, vivacious Annie who laughed at his dry jokes and seemed impressed by his steady job and careful ambitions. Annie who needed someone reliable after the disaster of her first marriage. Annie who introduced him to a world of social connections and aspirations beyond his working-class roots. He'd been so eager to prove himself worthy, to show that a trailer park kid could provide the security and comfort she deserved. He'd worked harder, saved more, built the life she wanted brick by careful brick. When had admiration turned to expectation? When had gratitude become entitlement? When had he transformed from partner to provider in her eyes? Merrick started the car and pulled away from his old home, the dust of the past settling behind him as he drove toward the present. An hour later, he pulled into Yusuf's Automotive, a well-maintained garage on the outskirts of Eugene. The familiar sounds of pneumatic tools and classic rock greeted him as he entered. Yusuf Carrington looked up from the engine he was working on, his dark face breaking into a genuine smile. At 45, Yusuf carried his years with the confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was worth. Motor oil stained his capable hands, and his coveralls bore the marks of honest work. Well, Yusuf called out, wiping his hands on a rag. If it isn't the man who keeps the supply chains running. What brings you to my humble establishment, Mr. Logistics? Just passing through, Merrick replied, the familiar rhythm of their friendship easing some of the tension he'd carried since last night's dinner. Thought I'd see if you were still abusing those perfectly good engines. Abuse? This is love, my friend. Deep, mechanical love. Yusuf patted the car he was working on. Unlike the shallow relationships you corporate types form with your spreadsheets. A young mechanic approached with a question, and Yusuf spent a few minutes explaining a complex repair procedure with patient detail. Merrick watched his friend's easy confidence, the respect in a younger man's eyes, and felt a pang of something like envy. When they were alone again, Yusuf gestured toward his office. Come on, I've got coffee that'll put hair on your chest and maybe strip some from your head. The office was small but organized, with framed certifications on the walls and a desk that had seen better days but served its purpose. Yusuf poured 2 mugs of coffee from a pot that had probably been sitting since morning, handed one to Merrick, and settled into his chair. "So," he said, fixing Merrick with a knowing look, "what's really going on? You've got that same look you had when you were thinking about buying that overpriced summer house Annie wanted." Merrick sipped the coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in and considered how much to share. Yusuf was the only person who knew the truth about his marriage, who had seen through the careful facade Merrick maintained for the rest of the world. "They're bleeding me dry, Yusuf," he finally said, setting down the mug, and laughing while they do it. Yusuf didn't ask who they were. He didn't need to. Annie's family again. The whole lot of them. "I just dropped 18 grand on a holiday vacation for them all. Premium everything. And you know what Carla called me? A walking wallet with a beard. Right in my own house." Yusuf winced. "Damn, that's cold. The worst part? She's right." Merrick leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "That's exactly what I've become. My father all over again. Working myself to death for people who see me as a resource, not a person. So what are you going to do about it?" Yusuf asked, his tone serious now. "Because you've been singing this song for years, man. Different verses, same chorus." Merrick stared into his coffee. "I've been looking into divorce." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. "That's a big step," Yusuf said carefully. "You sure about this? Divorce gets ugly, especially with money involved. What's the alternative? Stay until they've taken everything? Until I drop dead like my dad, and they move on to the next provider?" Yusuf leaned back in his chair, studying his friend. "Look, I'm not saying you're wrong. Annie and her family treat you like an ATM with legs. But divorce? That's nuclear. You don't got to go nuclear. Just walk away. Tell Annie things need to change. Go to counseling. Set some boundaries." Merrick shook his head, a grim smile forming. "Too late for that. Way too late. It's never too late to stand up for yourself, man. Standing up is one thing, but that's not good enough anymore." Merrick's voice had taken on a quiet intensity that made Yusuf sit up straighter. They need to understand what they're losing, what they've taken for granted. Yusuf frowned. "You're talking about revenge. I'm talking about consequences. Natural, logical consequences to years of disrespect and entitlement." "Merrick, you didn't hear them last night. Yusuf, laughing at me in my own house, using my money to fund their lifestyles while mocking the work I do to earn it." Merrick's hands tightened around his mug. "My mother warned me. She saw this coming." Yusuf sighed heavily. "Just don't do anything rash, all right? Whatever you're planning, sleep on it. Think it through. Remember that this isn't just about Annie, it's about Zeke too." "Zeke." Merrick's expression softened slightly. "He used to look at me like I hung the moon. Now he can barely be bothered to acknowledge me unless he needs money." The softness hardened again. "He's becoming just like them. He's a teenager. They're all assholes at that age." "No." Merrick shook his head. "This is different. This is learned behavior. He's watching how his mother and her family treat me, and he's following their lead." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the garage filtering through the thin office walls. "Whatever you decide," Yusuf finally said, "I've got your back. You know that, right? But think this through. All the angles." Merrick nodded, finishing his coffee. "I've been thinking about nothing else." As he drove home, Merrick's mind was unusually quiet. The endless calculations and considerations that usually occupied his thoughts had resolved into a single, clear understanding. He had spent 11 years being the reliable one, the steady provider, the man who could be counted on to solve every problem and foot every bill that IT was time to show them who he really was beneath the accommodating smile and open wallet. IT was time to become the man his mother had wanted him to be. The drive to MT Hood took longer than expected. An unexpected January storm had blown in, blanketing the roads with fresh snow and slowing traffic to a cautious crawl. Merrick didn't mind. The extra hours alone in his truck gave him time to think, to plan, to consider all the angles as Yusuf had advised. The wipers beat a steady rhythm against the windshield, clearing arcs of visibility through the falling snow. The heater hummed. The radio played classic rock at low volume. Everything normal. Everything as it should be. Except for the hollow feeling in his chest where something vital had finally broken beyond repair. Annie and her family had departed 3 days earlier, taking Zeke and his friend Jordan with them. Merrick had been scheduled to join them from the beginning, but an urgent work situation had provided a convenient excuse to stay behind. No one had questioned it. No one had seemed particularly disappointed. "Just make sure you're here for New Year's Eve," Annie had said, more concerned with appearances than his presence. "Mom's invited the Hendersons from her club, and it would look strange if you weren't there." Now, as darkness fell and the snow thickened, Merrick finally turned onto the private road leading to the chalets. The expensive winter tires he'd invested in gripped the slick surface, carrying him steadily up the winding path. Tall pines heavy with snow lined the way, their branches creating a natural tunnel that seemed to separate this world of privilege from the ordinary world below. The chalets came into view, 5 luxury cabins arranged in a semicircle around a central lodge. Warm light spilled from windows. Smoke curled from stone chimneys. Range Rovers and Mercedes SUVs parked in designated spaces testified to the exclusivity of the accommodations. Merrick pulled into the lot and killed the engine. He sat for a moment, watching his breath cloud in the cooling air of the truck cab. From the largest chalet, the one he was paying $975 per night for, came the sounds of music and laughter. New Year's Eve. The party in full swing. He reached into the glove compartment and removed a small, wrapped box, his gift for the new year. Inside was a USB drive containing carefully compiled documentation, financial records, text messages, and other evidence of years of systematic disrespect and exploitation. Also included was a formal letter from his lawyer, initiating divorce proceedings. The box was wrapped in silver paper with a perfect blue bow, Annie's favorite color combination for gifts. The irony wasn't lost on him. Merrick stepped out of the truck, the cold air biting at his face as he crunched through fresh snow toward the chalet. Music grew louder as he approached some pop song Annie had been playing constantly for the past month. Through the large front windows, he could see figures moving, glasses raised in toasts, the casual choreography of wealthy people enjoying themselves at someone else's expense. As he reached the broad wooden steps leading to the front door, something caught his eye. A handwritten sign had been taped to the polished wood. "No drama in 2025. Stay home, cash machine." Below it, someone had drawn a crude caricature of a bearded man with a dollar sign on his chest. Merrick stopped, staring at the sign. The music and laughter continued inside, oblivious to his presence in the darkness. Through the windows, he caught glimpses of familiar faces: Elaine holding court near the fireplace, Carla dancing with Victor, Annie throwing her head back in laughter at something someone had said. No one was looking for him. No one was waiting for his arrival. No one had even bothered to check if he was okay after driving through a snowstorm. He stood motionless, the gift box cold in his gloved hand, snow accumulating on his shoulders and hat as he watched the celebration continue without him. The sign's message burned into his vision like an afterimage. "Stay home, cash machine." Something shifted in Merrick, then not a breaking, but a solidifying. A crystallization of purpose that had been forming for months, perhaps years. The last fragile thread of loyalty, of obligation, of misplaced hope snapped silently in the winter night. He placed the gift box carefully on the doorstep, positioning it where it wouldn't be immediately visible but would be discovered eventually. Then he turned and walked back to his truck, brushing snow from his coat as he went. That he didn't ring the bell. He didn't announce his presence. He simply drove away, leaving behind the people who had taken everything he had to give and still wanted more. As he navigated back down the winding road, Merrick felt something unexpected. Not grief, not rage, not even satisfaction at what he knew would come next. Peace. For the first time in 11 years, he was finally making a choice for himself. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the downtown Eugene hotel room where Merrick had spent the last 3 nights. He sat at the small desk, laptop open, phone turned off, methodically working through his list. 3 days of silence. No calls answered. No texts returned. No emails acknowledged. He knew what was happening on the other end of that silence. First annoyance, then irritation. Finally genuine concern, not for him, but for the arrangements he managed, the bills he paid, the problems he solved. Why now? Annie would have tried calling his office. His assistant, following his instructions, would have politely informed her that Mr. Lawson was unavailable and could not be reached. Elaine might have tried contacting their shared accountant, only to discover that Merrick had revoked her authorization to discuss their finances. Even Zeke, prompted by his mother, would have sent the obligatory "everything okay" text that required minimal effort and expected maximum response. Merrick took a sip of hotel room coffee, bitter and thin, nothing like the premium beans he stocked at home, and checked his watch. Almost time. A knock at the door announced the arrival of his first visitor. Merrick opened it to find Remy Eldon standing in the hallway, his former college roommate, looking every inch the strategic consultant he'd become. At 47, Remy had the sharp eyes and careful posture of someone who made his living seeing angles others missed. His tailored suit and leather briefcase spoke of success, but the genuine smile he offered Merrick spoke of friendship. 3 cryptic text messages in the middle of the night, and here I am, Remy said, entering the room and setting down his briefcase. This better be good, Lawson. I canceled a meeting with a tech startup that was ready to throw obscene money at me for my wisdom. Trust me, Merrick replied, closing the door. This is more interesting than another app that will be obsolete in 6 months. Remy glanced around the modest hotel room, taking in Merrick's open laptop, the legal pad covered with neat writing, and the stack of financial documents on the desk. Either you're planning to embezzle from your company, or your marriage has finally imploded, Remy said. Given that I helped you set up your prenup 11 years ago and warned you that Annie had expensive taste written all over her, I'm guessing it's the latter. Merrick gestured to the room's only armchair. Have a seat. I need your expertise. Professional or personal? Both. Merrick returned to the desk chair. I need to extract myself from a financial relationship that's become parasitic, and I need to do it in a way that leaves no room for recovery. Remy's eyebrows rose. That sounds less like a divorce and more like a controlled demolition. Exactly. Merrick handed him the legal pad. Here's what I've already set in motion. I need you to check for weaknesses, overlooked details, potential counterattacks. Remy took the pad and began reading, his expression growing more impressed with each line. After a few minutes, he let out a low whistle. Damn, Merrick, this is comprehensive. He looked up, and cold as ice. What happened to the guy who spent 3 months finding the perfect anniversary gift last year? He found out what his wife really thought of him. Merrick's voice was steady, and what she was teaching their son to think. Remy nodded slowly, not asking for details. They'd known each other long enough that he could read the resolve in Merrick's eyes. All right, let's review this plan of yours. He tapped the legal pad. You've already pulled your name from the joint accounts? This morning. Transfer my portion to new accounts at a different bank. Credit cards. Cancel the ones I added family members to. Left Annie's primary card active for now, but removed myself as the paying guarantor. She'll discover that when the bill comes due. The mortgage. That's where I need your help. The house is in both our names, but I've made every payment for 9 years. Remy made a note. We'll need documentation of that. Full payment history. He continued scanning the list. Elaine's home renovation. You're cutting funding to your mother-in-law's house. I set up the financing through my company as a family benefit. Technically, I'm just reallocating company resources. She'll be furious. She's always furious. At least this time, she'll have a reason. Remy continued through the list, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. Merrick answered each with the precise detail of someone who had thought through every contingency. Your vintage Corvette, you're selling it. Remy looked up in surprise. You love that car. I need liquid assets more than I need a weekend driver. And Annie's sister's lease? You're pulling your name as co-signer. Carla hasn't paid her rent on time in 2 years. I've been covering the difference to protect my credit. Not anymore. Remy set down the pad and leaned back, studying his friend. You know what you're doing, right? This isn't just a divorce. You're systematically dismantling their entire financial ecosystem. They'll have nothing to fall back on. They'll have exactly what they earned themselves, Merrick corrected. What they actually contributed, which is almost nothing. Remy nodded slowly. Have you spoken with a divorce attorney yet? Meeting him this afternoon. Dion Marcus. Good choice. He's ruthless. Remy picked up the legal pad again. You're not just cutting them off, Merrick. You're making them implode. They won't just be angry, they'll be desperate. Desperate people do desperate things. Merrick nodded, his expression unchanging. I've considered that, and I've decided it's worth the risk. Remy studied him for a long moment. This isn't like you. The Merrick I know calculates every risk down to the decimal point. The Merrick you know has been slowly disappearing for years. He met his friend's gaze steadily. This isn't impulsive, Remy. It's the most clear-headed decision I've made in 11 years. After a moment, Remy nodded. All right, let's fill in these gaps. Make this airtight. He reached for his briefcase. First, we need to document every financial contribution you've made to this marriage. Every single one. As the day progressed, they meticulously constructed a financial fortress around what remained of Merrick's assets. Bank accounts were restructured, investment portfolios reallocated, credit cards canceled, automatic payments rerouted. By the time Merrick met with Dion Marcus that afternoon, he had a comprehensive strategy and the documentation to support that. Marcus's office occupied the top floor of a downtown building with views of the Willamette River. The attorney himself matched his surroundings, polished, expensive, with an edge of ruthless efficiency beneath the professional exterior. At 52, he had built a reputation as the divorce attorney of choice for high-net-worth clients who wanted results rather than reconciliation. Mr. Lawson, Marcus said, gesturing to a chair across from his imposing desk. Your friend Remy speaks highly of you. He says you're a man who knows exactly what he wants. I am. Merrick took the seat, placing a USB drive on the desk between them. Everything you need is on here. Financial records, text messages, emails, photographic evidence of systematic emotional abuse and financial exploitation. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but didn't touch the drive. Before we proceed, I need to ask, are you certain divorce is what you want? Oregon is a no-fault state, but that doesn't mean we can't use evidence of poor behavior to influence asset division. I'm certain. And your goal with this divorce? Financial separation, complete and irreversible. Children, one stepson, age 17, not biologically mine. No formal adoption. Marcus nodded, making notes. Any chance of reconciliation? None. Has your wife indicated she wants a divorce? No. She has no idea it's coming. This made Marcus pause, his pen hovering above his notepad. Mr. Lawson, ambushed divorces can backfire spectacularly. Emotions run high. Negotiations become impossible. Costs escalate. I'm not interested in negotiation, Merrick replied evenly. And I'm prepared for the costs. Marcus studied him with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen every variation of marital discord. May I speak frankly, Mr. Lawson? Please. You strike me as a rational man. Methodical, not given to dramatic gestures. Yet you're planning what amounts to a financial blitzkrieg against your wife and her family. That suggests either you've been pushed beyond your breaking point, or there's something you're not telling me. Merrick met his gaze steadily. The former. And it's all documented on that drive. After a moment, Marcus picked up the USB and inserted it into his computer. For the next 30 minutes, he reviewed the contents in silence, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. Merrick answered each precisely, without emotion. Finally, Marcus leaned back in his chair. I've seen my share of troubled marriages, Mr. Lawson. What you've documented here goes beyond the usual grievances. This is a pattern of systematic exploitation. Yes, and you've endured it for 11 years. I have. Why now? What changed? Merrick considered the question. I remembered something my mother told me before she died. Don't die for people who don't love you. My father worked himself to death for a family that didn't appreciate him. I was following the same path. Marcus nodded slowly. I can represent you, Mr. Lawson, and based on this evidence, I believe we can secure a favorable outcome. But I want to be clear about something. Go on. What you're planning will destroy your wife's life, as she knows it. Not just financially, but socially, emotionally. Her family, too. People don't just accept that kind of loss. They fight back, often in ways that can't be predicted or prevented. I understand the risk. Do you? Because once I file these papers, there's no going back. No reconciliation. No amicable settlement. This will be war. Merrick didn't hesitate. File the papers. Marcus held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. I'll have everything ready within 48 hours. In the meantime, I suggest you secure any personal items of value, physical or sentimental. Once she's served, you won't have peaceful access to your home again. Already done. And you have somewhere to stay. I've leased an apartment downtown. Month to month. Good. Marcus closed his notebook. One last question, Mr. Lawson. Is there anything else in your plan that I should know about? Anything that might complicate our legal strategy? Merrick thought of the small gift box he'd left on the doorstep of the chalet. By now, they would have found it. By now, they would know. No, he said. Nothing that concerns the legal proceedings. As he left Marcus's office, Merrick checked his phone for the first time in 3 days. 27 missed calls from Annie. 15 from Elaine. 43 text messages. 19 voicemails. He deleted them all without listening and turned the phone off again. Outside, the January afternoon was fading into early evening, the streetlights beginning to glow against the darkening sky. Merrick walked to his truck, his breath visible in the cold air, feeling lighter with each step. The storm was coming. But for the first time in years, he wasn't the one who would be caught in it unprepared. The morning of January 5th dawned clear and cold in MT Hood. Fresh snow from the night before blanketed the landscape, pristine and untouched in the early light. The chalets, with their stone facades and timber accents, looked like something from a winter tourism brochure, exclusive, remote, perfect. Merrick parked his truck at the edge of the property, out of direct view from the windows of the main chalet. He had timed his arrival carefully, just after sunrise when most of the party guests would still be asleep. The New Year's celebration had ended days ago, but Annie had extended their stay, using Merrick's credit card to cover the additional nights without consulting him that IT would be the last charge on that particular card. He approached on foot, the snow crunching beneath his boots, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The gift box was tucked securely under his arm, the same one he had left on the doorstep days ago, retrieved untouched after they had failed to notice it. This time, he would make sure it was delivered. As he neared the chalet, Merrick paused, taking in the scene. Empty champagne bottles and glasses still littered the deck. Expensive ski equipment was propped haphazardly against the railing. Someone's designer jacket had been left draped over a chair, now covered with a thin layer of snow. Through one of the windows, he could see into the main living area. Elaine was already awake, wrapped in a silk robe, sipping something from a mug as she gazed out at the mountains. She looked perfectly at ease, a woman accustomed to luxury and comfort provided by others. Merrick circled to the front of the chalet, staying out of the sight line from the windows. The crude sign that had greeted him on New Year's Eve was gone, but its message remained burned into his memory. In O-Drama, in 2025. Stay home. Cash machine. He placed the gift box directly in front of the door, positioning it so that it would be impossible to miss. Then he rang the bell 3 long presses and quickly retreated to a position behind a stand of pine trees where he could observe without being seen. Several minutes passed before the door opened. Victor stood there, hair disheveled, wearing what appeared to be a women's bathrobe several sizes too small for his frame. He squinted against the morning light, looking around in confusion before his gaze dropped to the box at his feet. "What the hell?" Victor muttered, bending to pick up the gift. He examined it for a moment, turning it over in his hands, before calling back into the house. "Annie, there's a present out here. Is it your birthday, or something?" Merrick watched as Victor carried the box inside, closing the door against the cold. Through the windows, he could see the activity as Annie appeared, taking the box from Victor with a puzzled expression. Carla joined them, followed by Zeke, all still in various states of sleepwear, gathering around as Annie began to unwrap the gift. It was like watching a silent film. He could see their expressions change, but couldn't hear their words. Annie's initial curiosity shifted to confusion as she removed the USB drive labeled "Read This." Her brow furrowed as she read the formal divorce notice, her mouth forming words that Merrick could imagine with perfect clarity: denial, disbelief, demands for explanation. Elaine approached, taking the papers from Annie's hands, her face hardening as she scanned the contents. Carla's mouth opened in what was surely an expletive. Victor stood back, suddenly very interested in the contents of his coffee mug. Then Annie found the letter addressed to Zeke. She handed it to her son, who took it with obvious reluctance. Merrick watched the boy's face as he read the initial dismissal, the gradual focus, the moment of realization. Something shifted in Zeke's expression, a flicker of something that might have been understanding before it was buried under practiced teenage indifference. The final item from the box, the burned copy of their messages mocking Merrick, along with a comprehensive collection of receipts documenting years of financial support, elicited the most dramatic reaction. Annie's face flushed red. Elaine's hand went to her throat. Carla began gesturing animatedly, pacing the room. Merrick had seen enough. As the chaos unfurled inside the chalet, he turned and walked back to his truck. Mission accomplished. The gift had been delivered. The message received. The process initiated. There would be no going back now. As he drove down the mountain, his phone began buzzing with incoming calls. Annie. Elaine. Annie again. Victor, surprisingly. He ignored them all, focusing on the road ahead, mentally preparing for the next phase of his plan. The calls continued throughout the day, becoming increasingly frantic. Texts followed, evolving from confusion to anger to threats. By evening, as Merrick settled into his sparse apartment in downtown Eugene, the tone had shifted to something approaching panic. Annie, call me now. This isn't funny. Elaine, you cannot do this to our family. We will fight you every step. Carla, WTF, Merrick? You can't just cut us off. Victor, look, man, we can talk about this. Don't do anything hasty. Zeke's message, when it finally came, was different from the others. I read your letter. I don't know what to think. Merrick stared at it for a long moment, his finger hovering over the reply button before he set the phone aside without responding. Zeke would need to make his own choices now, find his own path. Just after midnight, as Merrick was preparing for bed, the doorbell rang. He checked the security camera he had installed that afternoon and saw Annie standing in the hallway, her hair disheveled, wearing the same clothes she had been in that morning at the chalet. She must have driven straight from MT Hood. Merrick, she called, loud enough to disturb the neighbors. I know you're in there. Open this door right now. He stood silently in the darkened apartment, watching her through the camera feed. You can't do this. Annie continued, her voice rising. You can't just walk away after 11 years. You owe me an explanation. Merrick reached for his phone and sent a single text. The explanation was in the box. Everything you need to know. He watched as she received it, saw her face contort with rage as she read it. This is insane, she shouted at the door. Is this about New Year's? It was a joke, Merrick. Just a stupid joke. Another text. It wasn't the sign. It was the 11 years before it. Annie stared at her phone, then looked up at the door with an expression of disbelief that gradually shifted to calculation. Her posture changed, shoulders dropping, face softening into the look she had used countless times when she wanted something from him. Merrick, please, she said, her voice gentler now. Let's talk about this like adults. I know we've had our problems, but we can work through them. For Zeke's sake, if nothing else. No response. I love you, she tried, the words sounding hollow even through the tinny speaker of the security camera. I've always loved you. You know that. Merrick turned off the feed and went to bed, leaving Annie to her increasingly desperate monologue in the hallway. Eventually, building security would ask her to leave. If she refused, they would call the police. It wasn't his problem anymore. As he lay in the darkness of his new bedroom, surrounded by the few possessions he had chosen to take with him, Merrick felt neither triumph nor regret, just a strange, detached clarity. The gift had been delivered. The message received. Now came the consequences. 3 weeks after delivering his gift, Merrick sat across from Dion Marcus in the attorney's downtown office, reviewing the latest developments in what was rapidly becoming one of the most contentious divorces in the lawyer's career. Annie's attorney finally responded to our initial filing, Marcus said, sliding a document across the desk. As expected, they're contesting everything. Full spousal support, half of all assets, exclusive use of the family home during proceedings. Merrick scanned the response, his expression unchanged. In your assessment, it's a standard opening position. Aggressive, but not unusual. Marcus leaned back in his chair. What is unusual is the restraining order they've requested, claiming emotional and financial abuse. This did draw a reaction, a slight tightening around Merrick's eyes. On what grounds? They're characterizing your financial moves as deliberate economic terrorism designed to cause emotional distress. Marcus's tone remained professional, but there was a hint of admiration in his eyes. I have to say, Mr. Lawson, your wife's attorney isn't entirely wrong. Your approach has been comprehensive, but legal. Oh, entirely legal. Morally questionable, perhaps, but legally sound. Marcus tapped the document. The judge already denied the restraining order. No evidence of physical threat or actual harassment. But Annie's making some noise about your mental instability and sudden personality change. She's suggesting you may have had some sort of breakdown. Merrick nodded slowly. That was predictable. It's easier for her to believe I've lost my mind than to accept that I've finally found it. Indeed, Marcus shuffled through his notes. Now about the house. That's become our primary battlefield, because she's discovered she can't keep it. Exactly. Your name may be on the deed alongside hers, but you've made every payment for 9 years. More importantly, when you refinanced 2 years ago, you changed the ownership structure. Merrick allowed himself a small smile. From joint tenants to tenants in common with unequal shares. 90% ownership to me, 10% to Annie. She signed the papers without reading them, a fact her attorney is desperately trying to challenge. Marcus couldn't quite hide his professional appreciation. They're claiming she didn't understand what she was signing. Annie graduated summa cum laude from Oregon State. She managed a retail banking branch before we met. She understands financial documents. That's precisely what I argued. The judge wasn't sympathetic to her position. Marcus closed the folder. Which brings us to the other developments. Your in-laws. Merrick's expression hardened slightly. What about them? Carla and Victor Brighton were evicted from their apartment yesterday. The landlord terminated their lease after you removed your name as co-signer, and they failed to qualify on their own. They've moved in with Annie temporarily. Temporarily? Yes, because Annie herself is facing financial difficulties. The credit cards have been canceled. The joint accounts emptied before she could access them, and her personal account apparently contained less than $5,000. $4,823.16, Merrick corrected. I've been tracking her spending for years. She treats her personal account like a mad money fund. Everything substantial goes on the joint cards. Marcus nodded, which no longer exist. Meanwhile, Elaine Knox's home renovation has ground to a halt. The contractors walked off the job when the last 3 payments bounced. The LLC I created to fund the project has been dissolved, Merrick explained. All remaining funds were returned to my business account as a tax write-off. Clever. Marcus made a note. And finally, there's the matter of your stepson. Merrick's tone shifted subtly. What about Zeke? He's reached out to my office directly. Apparently, he's been trying to contact you. This was surprising. What does he want? To talk. That's all he would say. Marcus studied Merrick carefully. Should I arrange a meeting? Merrick considered this, remembering the single text Zeke had sent after reading his letter. The boy had made no further attempt to contact him directly, which Merrick had interpreted as a choice to side with his mother. Not yet, he finally said. Tell him when he's ready to be a man. He'll know where to find me. As you wish. Marcus gathered his papers. One more thing. Annie has been trying to control the narrative. She's telling friends and family that you've had some sort of mental break, that you're acting irrationally, that she's concerned for your well-being. Let her. It could affect how the court views asset division. Only if the judge believes her. The evidence shows otherwise. Marcus nodded. True, but perception matters in these cases. Just something to be aware of. As Merrick left the office, he checked his phone and found 3 missed calls from an unknown number. Curious, he listened to the voicemail. Mr. Lawson, this is Principal Hardrow from South Eugene High. I'm calling because Zeke hasn't been in school for the past week, and we haven't been able to reach his mother. If you could please call me back regarding this matter, I'd appreciate it. Merrick frowned. Regardless of the divorce, Zeke's education was important. He dialed the number. Principal Hargrove? This is Merrick Lawson returning your call about Zeke. The principal sounded relieved. Mr. Lawson, thank you for calling back. As I mentioned, Zeke hasn't been in school. We've tried reaching Mrs. Lawson, but her phone seems to be disconnected. I understand. I should inform you that Annie and I are in the process of divorcing. I'm Zeke's stepfather, not his legal guardian. Merrick kept his tone neutral. Have you tried his grandmother or aunt? We've exhausted all the emergency contacts in his file. His grandmother's number is also disconnected, and his aunt said she doesn't know where they're staying right now. That was interesting. They're not at our house. Apparently not, according to Zeke's friend Jordan, who's been collecting his assignments. He said something about them staying in a hotel. The house of cards was collapsing faster than Merrick had anticipated. Without access to credit or sufficient cash, Annie must have been unable to keep up with the mortgage payments he had stopped making. I see. I'll try to locate Zeke and make sure he returns to school. Merrick hesitated, then added, if he contacts the school directly, please tell him he can reach me at this number. After ending the call, Merrick sat in his truck, considering this new information. The financial isolation he had engineered was working exactly as planned, perhaps too well. Annie and her family were experiencing cascading consequences, each problem compounding the next. That IT was what he wanted, what he had planned for. Yet the thought of Zeke missing school, potentially derailing his future because of the adults' conflict, was troubling. He started the truck and headed toward his next appointment, pushing the concern aside. Zeke was 17, nearly an adult. He would have to learn that actions and inactions had consequences. Just as his mother was learning, the house of cards was falling. It was too late to catch the pieces. Now, 0.6 weeks into the divorce proceedings, Merrick stood in his office at Peterson Logistics, staring out the window at the Eugene skyline. The view wasn't spectacular, mostly mid-rise buildings and the distant green of surrounding hills, but it represented something he had built through his own efforts, his own merit. Unlike his marriage, his professional life had always been on solid ground. The knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Linda Chun, his assistant for the past 5 years, entered with a tablet in hand. The Singapore contract is finalized, she said, offering him the tablet. All parties have signed. Peterson stock is already up 3 points on the announcement. Merrick reviewed the document quickly before adding his electronic signature. The deal represented months of careful negotiation, a new supply chain partnership that would expand their Asia-Pacific operations significantly. Well done, Linda. Your work on the translation issues was invaluable. She accepted the compliment with a professional nod. Also, Mr. Peterson would like to see you when you have a moment. Interesting. The company's founder rarely requested meetings without scheduling them well in advance. I'll go now, Merrick said, straightening his tie. As he walked through the office toward the executive suite, Merrick noticed the sidelong glances from coworkers. The divorce had become common knowledge, though he had shared no details. Office gossip ensured everyone knew something was happening, but the specifics remained private. Robert Peterson's corner office occupied the top floor, with views in 2 directions and the kind of understated luxury that spoke of old money and quiet confidence. At 68, Peterson retained the sharp mind and direct manner that had built his company from a regional player to an international logistics force. Merrick, Peterson said, rising from behind his desk as Merrick entered. Come in. Have a seat. Merrick took the offered chair, noting the unusual formality of the interaction. Typically, Peterson was more casual with his executive team. I understand the Singapore deal is done, Peterson began. Excellent work, especially given your personal circumstances. And there it was, the oblique reference to his divorce, the first Peterson had made since the proceedings began. Thank you, sir. I've always believed in compartmentalizing work and personal matters. Peterson studied him for a moment. Yes, you have. It's one of your strengths. He leaned back in his chair. I'll be direct, Merrick. There's an opening at the executive level. Vice President of Global Operations. Richard is retiring at the end of the quarter. Merrick kept his expression neutral, though his heart rate increased. This was a significant promotion, one he had been working toward for years. "I'm interested," he said simply. "Good, because the board has already approved your appointment." Peterson slid a folder across the desk. "Effective immediately. We need someone with your focus and determination to oversee the Asia expansion." Merrick accepted the folder, opening it to find the formal offer letter with a compensation package that represented a 40% increase over his current salary. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored by the confidence." Peterson nodded, then hesitated. "Merrick, I don't typically involve myself in my employees' personal lives. But I've known you for 15 years, since you started in the warehouse routing division. The man I've observed these past weeks is different from the one I thought I knew." Merrick met his gaze steadily. "Different how?" "Harder. More calculating." Peterson's expression wasn't judgmental, merely observant. "The rumor mill suggests you've executed a rather ruthless exit strategy from your marriage. Rumors are often exaggerated." "Often, yes. But Annie has been contacting board members, trying to paint you as unstable. Dangerous, even." This was unexpected. Annie had escalated beyond friends and family to his professional connections. "I see. Do you?" Peterson leaned forward. "Because what I see is a man who finally stopped tolerating disrespect, who drew a line and held it. I've seen the text messages, Merrick. The one she accidentally included when she emailed the board secretary." Merrick stiffened. "What messages?" "The ones where she and her family discuss you as if you were nothing more than a walking ATM. The ones where she complains about your boringly reliable nature while planning vacations on your dime." Peterson's expression hardened slightly. "My first wife was similar. I wish I'd had your resolve 20 years ago." The revelation caught Merrick off guard. Peterson had always seemed the epitome of successful marriage, his second wife a fixture at company events. "The board isn't concerned about my personal situation. The board is concerned with results, Merrick, and yours speak for themselves." Peterson stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "The Singapore deal during a personal crisis? That shows exactly the kind of focus we need in executive leadership." Merrick rose, tucking the folder under his arm. "Thank you for the opportunity. I won't disappoint you. I know you won't." Peterson extended his hand. "And Merrick? For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Sometimes the only way to deal with toxic people is to cut them out completely." As Merrick left Peterson's office, the weight of the promotion settled alongside the ongoing pressure of the divorce. Professional advancement amid personal deconstruction. It was, in its way, a perfect metaphor for his current state. Back in his office, Merrick found a text message waiting on his phone. Unknown number. "It's Zeke. We need to talk. I'm at Yusuf's garage." Merrick stared at the message, surprised that Zeke had tracked down Yusuf. More surprising was that Yusuf had apparently allowed it. After a moment's hesitation, he replied, "I'll be there in 30 minutes." The drive to Yusuf's automotive gave Merrick time to prepare for whatever confrontation awaited. Zeke might be there to condemn him, to plead Annie's case, or simply to demand money. The boy had never shown much interest in Merrick's side of any story that Yusuf's garage was quiet when he arrived. The main bay doors closed for the day. Merrick parked and entered through the side door, finding Yusuf alone at his workbench, rebuilding what appeared to be a carburetor. "Your stepson's in the office," Yusuf said without looking up. "Kid showed up 2 hours ago asking for you. Looks like he hasn't slept in days." "How'd he find you?" "Said he remembered me from that fishing trip 3 years back. The one where his hook caught your ear instead of trout." Yusuf finally glanced up. "He's hurting, Merrick. Whatever's going on with you and Annie, that kid is caught in the crossfire." Merrick nodded, absorbing the implicit criticism. "Thanks for letting him wait here. Wasn't doing it for you." Yusuf returned to his work. "Go talk to him. And remember, he's not the one who put that sign on the door." The reminder was unnecessary but effective. Merrick walked to the small office at the back of the garage, knocking once before entering. Zeke sat in Yusuf's desk chair, looking smaller than his 17 years. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unwashed, dark circles under his eyes suggesting several nights of poor sleep. When he looked up at Merrick's entrance, his expression was a complex mixture of anger, relief, and exhaustion. "You actually came," Zeke said, his voice hoarse. "You asked to talk. I'm here." Merrick remained standing, maintaining a careful distance. What do you need, Zeke? The directness of the question seemed to throw the boy off his prepared script. He blinked, then looked down at his hands. Everything's falling apart, he finally said. Mom's freaking out. Grandma won't stop crying. Aunt Carla and Uncle Victor are fighting constantly. No one knows what to do. Merrick didn't respond, waiting for the actual point of this meeting. We're staying at the Days Inn on Franklin, Zeke continued. 4 of us in one room because it's all Mom could afford. She says you took everything, that you planned this for months, just waiting for the right moment to destroy us. Is that what you believe? Zeke looked up, unexpected anger flashing in his eyes. I don't know what to believe. Last month, everything was normal. Now we're basically homeless. Mom's talking about moving in with her cousin in Portland, and you're just gone. I left you a letter, Merrick said quietly. Did you read it? Yeah, I read it. That cryptic bullshit about not being my mother? Being careful who I become. Zeke stood suddenly, pacing the small office. What does that even mean? It means you have a choice, Zeke. You can follow your mother's example using people, taking without giving, building your life on other people's efforts. Or you can choose a different path. That's not fair. Mom's not like that. Merrick raised an eyebrow. No. Then why is she staying in a hotel instead of our house? Why did she never have more than $5,000 in her personal account despite not paying for any major expenses for 11 years? Why did she laugh when her family called me a walking wallet? Zeke's face flushed. She's not perfect, okay? But this what you're doing, it's cruel. Perhaps, Merrick acknowledged. But it's also honest. For the first time in our relationship, everyone is seeing the truth. Your mother and her family lived on my efforts, my money, my constant sacrifice. Now they're living on their own resources. The difference is illuminating, isn't it? Zeke stared at him, conflict evident in his expression. I'm missing school, he finally said, his voice smaller. My college applications are due next month, and I can't even focus on them. Mom says we might have to move. So what's the point? This was the real concern then. Not family loyalty, but self-interest. Typical teenager, after all. Your education matters, Zeke. That hasn't changed. Merrick reached into his pocket and withdrew a small key. The home office at the house. The key is to the filing cabinet. Bottom drawer. There's a folder with your name on it. College fund information. It's in your name only. Annie can't touch it. Zeke stared at the key. You set up a college fund for me when you were 8. I've been contributing to it monthly for 9 years. Mom said. She said you were keeping all the money, that you never really cared about us. Merrick felt a familiar weariness. What served her narrative in the moment has always been more important to your mother than the truth. Zeke took the key slowly, as if it might burn him. So, what happens now? That depends on you. You're 17, almost an adult, old enough to make your own choices. What choices? I'm stuck with Mom. I don't have anywhere else to go. Merrick considered the boy standing before him. Not a child anymore, but not quite a man. Caught between loyalty to his mother and the pragmatic reality of his situation. Part of Merrick, the part that remembered fishing trips and school projects, wanted to offer him shelter, stability. But another part, the part that had endured years of increasing disrespect, held back. You can stay with me tonight, Merrick finally said. Just tonight. Get some rest, clean up, think about what you want for your future. Tomorrow, you make your choice. Zeke's relief was palpable. Really? But what about Mom? Text her. Tell her you're safe. That's all she needs to know right now. The boy hesitated, then nodded, already pulling out his phone. As Merrick watched him tap out a message, he felt a complicated mix of emotions. Not forgiveness, he was far from that. But perhaps a recognition that Zeke, for all his recent attitude, was as much a product of his environment as a willing participant in a point one night. One chance for the boy to see a different way, that it wasn't generosity that motivated Merrick, but something closer to obligation. A final acknowledgement of the role he had played in Zeke's life before closing that chapter for good. Ready? He asked when Zeke finished texting. The boy nodded, following Merrick out of the office. Yusuf looked up as they passed, giving Merrick a small nod of approval. Outside, as they walked to their respective vehicles, Zeke paused. Merrick, he said hesitantly, that sign at New Year's. I didn't know about it. I wouldn't have let them put it up if I'd known. Merrick studied him for a moment. But you laughed when you saw it, didn't you? Zeke's silence was answer enough. Follow me to my apartment, Merrick said, ending the conversation. We'll order pizza. As he drove, Merrick reflected on the unexpected turn of events. He admit what he said this was one night, not a reconciliation or a continuing relationship. Zeke would need to make his own way, just as Merrick had done at his age. But for tonight, at least one piece of the collapsed house of cards would have shelter. IT was more than Annie and her family had offered Merrick in years. 2 months after filing for divorce. Merrick sat in the conference room of Dion Marcus's law office, waiting for the preliminary settlement discussion to begin. Across the polished table, Annie and her attorney, Patricia Donovan, presented a united front of injured dignity and righteous indignation. Annie had made an effort with her appearance, hair perfectly styled, makeup carefully applied to suggest both vulnerability and determination. She wore a conservative blue dress that Merrick recognized from her former bank manager days, the one she reserved for situations requiring an impression of competence. That IT was a costume, like so many aspects of their marriage had been. Marcus entered with his assistant, who carried several folders and a laptop. The attorney nodded cordially to Donovan before taking his seat beside Merrick. Thank you all for agreeing to this meeting, Marcus began. While the court date is set for next month, I believe it's in everyone's interest to see if we can reach an amicable resolution. Donovan offered a thin smile. My client is certainly open to reasonable discussion, though Mr. Lawson's actions to date have been anything but reasonable. Let's focus on the issues rather than characterizations, Marcus suggested mildly. The primary matters are asset division, the family home, and Mrs. Lawson's request for alimony. Substantial alimony, Donovan corrected. My client gave up her banking career to support Mr. Lawson's professional advancement. She managed their home, raised her son, and maintained the social connections that facilitated his success. Annie nodded, her expression a perfect blend of stoic suffering and quiet dignity. It was a performance Merrick had seen before, typically deployed when she wanted to justify a major purchase or explain away some financial excess. Mrs. Lawson's banking career ended before their marriage, Marcus pointed out, opening one of his folders. According to her employment records, she was asked to resign following discrepancies in her branch's accounting. Annie's composure slipped momentarily. That was a misunderstanding. I was cleared of any wrongdoing. You were not prosecuted, Marcus corrected. That's different from being cleared. He slid a document across the table. We have statements from your former supervisor indicating that while there was insufficient evidence for criminal charges, the bank chose to separate from you due to concerns about financial judgment. Donovan quickly covered the document with her hand. This is irrelevant to the current proceedings. On the contrary, Marcus replied, it directly addresses the claim that Mrs. Lawson sacrificed a promising career for marriage. The reality is that her banking career was already effectively over. Annie's face flushed with anger. That's not true. I chose to leave banking to support Merrick's career. Merrick watched her, saying nothing. This was the pattern: assertion, contradiction, indignation, then a new narrative to replace the failed one. Regardless, Donovan interjected smoothly, my client has been out of the workforce for over a decade as the supportive spouse. Oregon law is clear about spousal maintenance in such situations. Oregon law also considers the financial contributions of each party. Marcus countered, opening another folder. My client has documented every household expense for the past 11 years. Mrs. Lawson's contribution to their shared expenses averaged less than 8% of total household costs, despite having independent income from a family trust. This was news to Merrick. He glanced at Marcus, who gave a barely perceptible nod. The attorney had discovered something in his investigations that even Merrick hadn't known. Donovan frowned. What family trust? My client has disclosed all assets. The Knox family trust, established by her maternal grandfather, Marcus explained, producing another document. Mrs. Lawson receives quarterly distributions of approximately $5,000. This income was never disclosed in the joint accounts, nor was it contributed to household expenses. Annie's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. That's personal inheritance. It has nothing to do with our marriage. Income received during the marriage is relevant to determining need for spousal support. Marcus corrected, especially when that income was deliberately concealed from your spouse. I didn't conceal anything. Annie protested. It just wasn't relevant to our household finances. Merrick earned plenty for both of us. And there was the admission that she had never seen their finances as truly joint, never considered her own resources as part of their shared responsibilities. Marcus continued methodically. Let's move on to the family home. As previously established, Mr. Lawson holds 90% ownership under the tenants in common arrangement. Mrs. Lawson signed and initialed the refinancing documents, clearly indicating this division. Under pressure or misconception, Donovan argued, my client did not understand the implications of the ownership structure change. Mrs. Lawson has a business degree and worked in banking, Marcus reminded her. The court has already rejected the argument that she didn't understand standard real estate documents. He turned to his assistant. Please distribute the mortgage payment records. As the documents were passed around, Marcus continued. As you can see, Mr. Lawson made every mortgage payment for 9 years. Mrs. Lawson made 0 contributions to the home's financing, maintenance, property taxes, or insurance. Annie leaned toward her attorney, whispering urgently. Donovan's expression remained professionally neutral, but the tightening around her eyes suggested the information was problematic for their position. My client acknowledges that Mr. Lawson handled most household expenses, Donovan said carefully. But she contributed in non-financial ways that enabled his career success. The law recognizes the value of such contributions. Indeed it does, Marcus agreed. However, the law also recognizes financial reality. Mrs. Lawson has requested exclusive use of the family home during proceedings, yet since Mr. Lawson stopped making mortgage payments 2 months ago, no payments have been made at all. The property is now in pre-foreclosure. This revelation caused a visible reaction from both Annie and her attorney. Donovan quickly flipped through her notes. That's financial sabotage, Annie sputtered. He's deliberately damaging our credit and our property. Mr. Lawson is under no obligation to make payments on a property he no longer resides in. Marcus replied calmly. Mrs. Lawson has been living in hotels rather than maintaining the asset she claims to want, because he cut off all our money. Annie's composure was crumbling rapidly. He canceled every credit card, emptied the accounts, left us with nothing. He removed his funds from joint accounts. Marcus corrected. Any funds you personally deposited remained available to you. The fact that there were virtually none speaks to the financial imbalance in your marriage. Annie turned to Merrick directly, abandoning the pretense of communicating through attorneys. I didn't work. We agreed that I would manage our home and social life while you handle the finances. You can't change the rules now and act like I was supposed to be contributing equally. It was the first time she had addressed him directly since the separation. Merrick met her gaze steadily. We never agreed to that arrangement, Annie. You assumed it, and I accepted it for too long. This is ridiculous, and he turned back to the attorneys. He's punishing me for not being the perfect little wife, for having opinions and a social life. No, Merrick said quietly. I'm holding you accountable for years of taking without giving. For teaching Zeke that I was nothing more than a resource to be exploited. For allowing your family to disrespect me in my own home. Mr. Lawson, Donovan interjected, these personal grievances they're the heart of the matter. Marcus interrupted. My client is not seeking divorce over trivial issues. He has documented a pattern of systematic exploitation and emotional abuse. He produced a final folder, thicker than the others. Text messages between Mrs. Lawson and her family members, referring to my client as the wallet, the ATM, and other dehumanizing terms. Email exchanges planning expenditures specifically to deplete his savings. Social media posts mocking his occupation and appearance. Annie paled as Marcus laid out the evidence. Those were private jokes. Everyone vents about their spouse sometimes. Perhaps, Marcus acknowledged. But the volume and consistency of these communications suggest something far more deliberate and malicious. He turned to Donovan. My client is prepared to offer a settlement. Mrs. Lawson receives 20% of their liquid assets, no alimony, and relinquishes all claim to the family home, which will be sold with proceeds divided according to the established ownership percentages. Donovan looked at the evidence spread across the table, then at her client, whose expression had shifted from indignation to calculation. We'll need to discuss this privately, Donovan said. Of course. Marcus gathered his documents. We'll give you the room. As Merrick followed his attorney out, Annie called after him. Merrick, wait. Her voice had softened, taking on the conciliatory tone she used when trying to repair damage. Can we talk about this? Just the two of us? We were happy once. Merrick paused at the door, looking back at the woman he had spent 11 years trying to please. No, Annie. I was never happy. I was useful. There's a difference. In the hallway, Marcus led Merrick to a smaller conference room. That went exactly as expected, the attorney said, loosening his tie slightly. She'll take the offer. You're certain? She has no choice. The evidence is overwhelming, and her financial position is deteriorating daily. Marcus gave Merrick an appraising look. Your approach was unorthodox, but effective. Most clients let emotion drive their decisions. You operated with surgical precision. I had a good teacher, Merrick replied. 11 years of watching Annie manipulate situations taught me how to dismantle them. Marcus nodded. There's one more item I thought you might find interesting. He produced a real estate listing on his tablet. The MT Hood Chalet where you left your gift. It's been listed for sale. Merrick took the tablet, studying the familiar property. Management company selling after the season? Not exactly. Marcus smiled slightly. The owner is listed as Lawson Holdings, LLC. Established 3 months ago, sole member being yourself. Merrick looked up in surprise. I don't own that property. You do, actually. The paperwork was completed last week. Marcus looked rather pleased with himself. You mentioned wanting to make a final investment in their humiliation. I took the liberty of arranging it. Explain. The property came on the market at a distressed price. The former owner had tax issues. Given your interest in real estate investments for your portfolio, I assumed you'd want to acquire a property with such personal significance. Merrick stared at the listing, processing the implications. You bought the chalet where they rejected me. Without consulting me. I initiated the process. Marcus corrected. The final decision was yours. You signed the papers last week, among the other documents for your investment portfolio restructuring. It was true. Merrick had signed a substantial package of documents, trusting Marcus's guidance on diversifying his assets during the divorce proceedings. And now it's for sale again? At a significant markup, I see. The market for luxury properties in MT Hood is quite robust, Marcus said with professional satisfaction. You stand to make approximately 18% return on investment after holding costs. Almost exactly the amount you spent on their holiday. The symmetry was perfect, poetic even. Merrick had funded their vacation at the chalet, been rejected at its door, and now would profit from its sale. The circle was complete. When does the sale close? There are 3 offers already. I expect completion within 30 days. Marcus took back the tablet. I thought you'd appreciate the elegance of the arrangement. Merrick nodded slowly. I do. It's a fitting conclusion. When they returned to the main conference room, Annie and Donovan were waiting with tight expressions. We're prepared to counter, Donovan began, but Annie interrupted. I'll take the offer, she said, her voice flat. 20% of the liquid assets. No alimony. I surrender any claim to the house. Donovan looked uncomfortable, but didn't contradict her client. We would request that the division be completed quickly. Mrs. Lawson's current living situation is unsustainable. Of course, Marcus agreed smoothly. We can have the necessary paperwork ready by tomorrow. As the attorneys discussed details, Annie stared at Merrick across the table. The calculation in her eyes had been replaced by something harder to define, not quite defeat, not quite respect, but a reluctant recognition. You've changed, she said quietly. I never thought you had this in you. I was always this person, Merrick replied. You just never bothered to see beyond what you could get from me. Annie's mouth tightened. This was about the sign on the door, wasn't it? That stupid New Year's joke. No, Annie. It was about the 11 years that made that joke possible. It was about what you taught our son. It was about what I was becoming by enabling all of you. Zeke still needs you. Zeke needs to learn that actions have consequences, that building a life on other people's efforts leads nowhere sustainable. Merrick gathered his papers, preparing to leave. A lesson his mother is learning rather late. Annie's face hardened. You'll regret this. Being alone. Having no family. I was already alone, Merrick said simply. The difference is that now I'm free. As he walked out of the conference room, Merrick felt the weight of the past 11 years finally beginning to lift. The divorce wasn't final yet, but the outcome was now inevitable. Annie had accepted defeat not gracefully, not willingly, but definitively. The last card at her house of illusions had fallen, and Merrick, for the first time in longer than he could remember, was standing tall in the wreckage. 1 year later, the morning light filtered through the windows of Merrick's house in Bend, Oregon, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floors. At 43, Merrick moved through his morning routine with the same methodical precision that had always characterized his approach to life, but the tension that had once accompanied every motion was gone. Coffee brewed in the kitchen, its rich aroma filling the space. Toast with local honey, a simple pleasure he hadn't allowed himself during his marriage, when breakfast had been elaborate productions designed to showcase Annie's domestic talents rather than provide actual nourishment. Cooper, the 2-year-old chocolate lab he had adopted from the shelter 6 months ago, sprawled on the deck outside, soaking in the early spring sunshine. The dog's presence had been an unexpected addition to Merrick's carefully structured new life, but one he found himself grateful for each day. He sipped his coffee. Merrick checked his calendar. Yusuf was coming over that evening to watch the basketball playoffs. A meeting with his financial advisor tomorrow. And Zeke would be arriving on Friday for his monthly visit. That last entry still surprised him sometimes. After their one night of tentative reconnection during the divorce, Merrick had expected Zeke to choose his mother's side definitively. Instead, the boy had forged his own path, one that included keeping Merrick and his life on new, more honest terms. Their relationship wasn't what it had been during Zeke's childhood. The easy affection had been replaced by something more cautious, more earned. But it was real in a way their previous connection hadn't been, built on mutual respect rather than obligation or financial dependence. Merrick's phone chimed with a text message. He glanced at the screen. Zeke got accepted to Oregon Tech full ride engineering scholarship. Thought you should know. Pride mixed with satisfaction as Merrick read the message. After the divorce settlement, Annie had moved to Portland with Elaine, taking Zeke to finish his senior year there. The boy had struggled initially, his grades dropping as he adjusted to the upheaval. But something had shifted during their monthly visits. Zeke had started asking questions about Merrick's work, about logistics systems, about how things moved efficiently from point A to point B, why the time college applications were due. Zeke had developed a genuine interest in systems engineering. With Merrick's encouragement, but not financial support, he had applied for competitive scholarships, putting in the work himself rather than expecting others to smooth his path. Merrick typed his reply. Congratulations. You earned it through your own efforts. That makes it more valuable. The response came quickly. Zeke, yeah, I get that now. See you Friday. Merrick set down his phone, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had, in at least this one way, broken the cycle. Zeke was learning to stand on his own achievements rather than other support. It was the lesson Merrick had most wanted to teach him. After breakfast, Merrick moved to the small studio space he had set up in what would traditionally have been a formal dining room. Canvases in various stages of completion lined the walls. Paints and brushes were organized with the same precision he brought to his professional life. Painting had started as therapy, suggested by the counselor he had finally agreed to see 6 months after the divorce. It had become something more, a way to process emotions that had been suppressed for years, to express the complexity he had always hidden beneath his accommodating exterior. He wasn't particularly talented, but that wasn't the point. The act itself of creating something purely for his own satisfaction with no practical purpose or benefit to others, was revolutionary for a man who had spent his adult life producing for others' consumption. Merrick worked on his current project for an hour, losing himself in the rhythm of brush on canvas, before cleaning up to start his workday. As VP of Global Operations for Peterson Logistics, he could work remotely most days, traveling to the Eugene office only when necessary for in-person meetings. The promotion had come with increased responsibility, but also increased flexibility. Merrick had used that flexibility to relocate to Bend, a smaller city with outdoor recreation opportunities and enough distance from Eugene to discourage casual contact with former social connections. His new home was smaller than the house he had shared with Annie, 3 bedrooms instead of 5, modest landscaping instead of the showcase garden Annie had insisted on but never maintained. It was designed for comfort rather than impression, with spaces that served his actual needs instead of projected status. The house in Eugene had sold quickly once Annie surrendered her claim. Merrick had split the proceeds according to the ownership agreement, despite his lawyer's suggestion that he could fight for more given Annie's financial misconduct. He hadn't wanted to prolong the connection any more than necessary. Clean breaks healed better. He settled at his desk to begin reviewing Asia-Pacific shipping reports. Merrick glanced at the framed item on his wall, the crude sign that had greeted him at the chalet door that New Year's Eve and drama in 2025. Stay home. Cash machine that he had retrieved it from the trash when the chalet was being prepared for sale, keeping it as a reminder of the moment everything changed. Not because it still hurt, the pain had faded months ago, but because it represented a turning point, the moment he had chosen self-respect over self-sacrifice. Midway through the afternoon, as Merrick was concluding a video conference with partners in Singapore, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Normally, he would let it go to voicemail, but something prompted him to answer. Merrick Lawson. Mr. Lawson. A woman's voice, professional but warm. This is Dr. Whitman from Ben Memorial. I'm calling about your mother-in-law, Elaine Knox. You're listed as her emergency contact. Merrick frowned. There must be a mistake. Elaine Knox is my former mother-in-law. We've been divorced for a year. I see. The doctor paused. She was admitted this morning after a fall. Her insurance information still lists you as the primary contact. She has no other emergency contacts in our system. Of course she didn't. Annie would be too busy with her new life. She had remarried 6 months after their divorce was finalized to a real estate developer who hadn't yet discovered the pattern Merrick had lived with for 11 years. Carla and Victor had separated, each blaming the other for their financial collapse after Merrick withdrew his support. What is her condition? Merrick asked, more out of polite obligation than genuine concern. Stable, but she'll need surgery for a broken hip. She's asking to speak with you. That was surprising. The last time Merrick had seen Elaine was at the divorce proceedings, where she had sat behind Annie with an expression of righteous indignation, occasionally muttering about ingratitude and betrayal. I don't think that would be helpful to her recovery. Doctor, perhaps not, Dr. Whitman conceded. But she's quite insistent. Something about setting things right before surgery. Merrick considered refusing. He owed Elaine nothing less than nothing, given her years of subtle undermining and outright disrespect. But curiosity won out over indifference. Text me the room number. I'll stop by this evening. After ending the call, Merrick sat quietly, contemplating this unexpected connection to his past. He had built his new life carefully, deliberately excluding anyone associated with the old one, except for Zeke. Seeing Elaine meant reopening a door he had firmly closed. Yet something about the request, its timing, its apparent urgency, suggested there might be value in the encounter. If nothing else, it would be a measure of his own healing to face someone who had contributed significantly to his former unhappiness. That evening, after rescheduling with Yusuf, Merrick walked through the antiseptic corridors of Ben Memorial Hospital, following the directions to Elaine's room. He found her propped up in bed, looking older and smaller than he remembered. At 69, the year's hardships had etched new lines in her face, dulled the once glossy hair she had maintained so carefully. She looked up as he entered, surprise flickering across her features despite having requested his presence. Merrick, you actually came. You asked to see me. He remained standing near the door, maintaining distance, both physical and emotional. The doctor said it was important. Elaine adjusted her position, wincing slightly from the movement. They want to do surgery tomorrow. Hip replacements are routine these days, but at my age. She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders with a shadow of her former dignity. I want to clear the air, just in case. Merrick said nothing, waiting for her to continue. What you did to Annie to all of us was cruel, she began, her tone carrying a familiar note of judgment. But I've had a year to think about why you did it. And your conclusion? That we deserved it. The admission seemed to physically pain her. Not all of it, perhaps, but enough that I can't honestly claim innocence. This was unexpected. Elaine Knox admitting fault was like witnessing a natural phenomenon previously thought impossible. Why tell me this now? Merrick asked. Because I might not get another chance. She smoothed the thin hospital blanket with age-spotted hands. And because Zeke speaks highly of you. Says you taught him something important about self-reliance. Zeke has been speaking to you about me. This was news. The boy had never mentioned maintaining contact with his grandmother during their visits. He comes by sometimes. Checks on me. Annie's too busy with Richard and his social circle to visit often. A hint of the old bitterness crept into her voice before she controlled it. Zeke told me you never had him over for dinner. Merrick's brow furrowed at the non-sequitur. What? Before the divorce. He said you mentioned that I never invited you to dinner without expecting something in return. It made me realize he was right. 11 years, and I never once asked you to my home simply because you were family. The observation was accurate, but seemed trivial compared to the larger pattern of exploitation. It wasn't about dinner invitations, Elaine. No, but it was symbolic of the larger problem. She met his gaze directly. We never saw you as family, only as Annie's provider. Zeke's substitute father, our financial safety net. Merrick nodded, acknowledging the truth of her assessment. And now I'm having surgery in a hospital where my former son-in-law is still listed as my emergency contact because no one else bothered to update the information. Or perhaps her mouth twisted wryly because no one else would actually respond if called. The irony wasn't lost on Merrick. Elaine had built her life around social connections. Yet when she genuinely needed help, those connections had proven superficial at best. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she continued, or reconciliation, or financial assistance, though God knows I could use it. She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I simply wanted to acknowledge, before I might lose the chance, that I understand why you did what you did. Merrick absorbed her words, searching for the manipulation or hidden agenda that had characterized their previous interactions. Finding none, he nodded once. Thank you for telling me. Will you tell Zeke I'm here? When he visits you next? Elaine asked, vulnerability replacing her usual imperious manner. Annie doesn't know about the fall yet. I didn't want to worry her. More likely, Merrick thought, Annie had made it clear that her new life didn't include space for her mother's problems. I'll tell him, Merrick promised, moving toward the door. There was nothing more to say, no relationship to rebuild, just this brief intersection of two lives now firmly separated. As he reached the threshold, Elaine spoke again. Merrick, are you happy now? After everything? He paused, considering the question with the same careful assessment he brought to all important matters. I'm at peace, he finally said. That's worth more than happiness. Elaine nodded slowly. I think I understand that now. As Merrick drove home through the quiet streets of Bend, snow beginning to fall lightly on the windshield, he reflected on the unexpected encounter. There was no satisfaction in seeing Elaine diminished, no vindication in her belated recognition of her role in the family's dynamics. Just a quiet confirmation that he had made the right choice in extracting himself completely from their web of entitlement and expectation. Home. Cooper greeted him with enthusiastic affection, uncomplicated and genuine. Merrick took the dog for a walk through the neighborhood, watching the snow accumulate on rooftops and tree branches, transforming the familiar landscape into something new and clean. Later, as he stood at his living room window watching the snowfall, Merrick's gaze drifted to the framed sign on his wall. The crude caricature and mocking words had once represented everything wrong with his marriage: the disrespect, the exploitation, the fundamental misunderstanding of his worth. Now it represented something different. The moment he had reclaimed himself, the catalyst for rebuilding a life based on self-respect rather than others' approval. No drama. In 2025, he whispered to himself, a small smile forming. Damn right. The promise had been kept, not by avoiding conflict, but by resolving it definitively. Not by maintaining a facade of harmony, but by insisting on genuine respect. Not by sacrificing himself for others' comfort, but by establishing boundaries that protected his own. Merrick turned away from the window, Cooper padding softly after him as he moved through the house, checking doors, adjusting thermostats, the comfortable routine of a man at home in his own space, his own life, that he didn't forgive them, not Annie, not Elaine, not any of them. Forgiveness wasn't necessary for his peace. Understanding was sufficient. Acceptance of what had been, appreciation for what now, was as he prepared for bed. Merrick thought about the conversations he would have with Zeke about his grandmother, about college, about the path forward. He thought about the painting waiting in his studio, the work meetings scheduled for tomorrow, the dinner plans with Yusuf rescheduled for the weekend, that a life rebuilt. Not perfect, not always happy, but authentically his own. Every choice, every consequence, every reward earned through his own efforts rather than borrowed from others' expectations. That IT was enough. More than enough. That IT was freedom.